David Gant was an ordinary man who spent nearly 16 hours a day surrounded by bundles of cash, yet his own pockets were always empty. He worked as a vault supervisor for Loomis Fargo, a security company responsible for transporting millions of dollars between banks. While guarding enormous amounts of money, he earned only about $8 an hour. Welcome once again to Voicely Stories. A retired Gulf War soldier, David was exhausted by long working hours, loneliness, and the heavy burden of family responsibilities. Working 75 to 80 hours a week for such low pay slowly drained him. Frustration, isolation, and the feeling that he would never achieve anything big in life began to destroy his peace of mind. That was the moment when wrong thoughts started to take root in his mind. Around this time, a woman named Kelly Campbell entered his life. She also worked at Loomis Fargo and was known to be bold and mysterious. During their time at the company, Kelly and David became friends and often met after work. Even after Kelly left her job, they continued to stay in touch. One day, she introduced David to her friend Steve Chambers, a small-time criminal who dreamed of making fast money. When Steve learned that David was a vault supervisor at Loomis Fargo, an idea immediately formed in his mind: to rob the company. But for the plan to succeed, David had to be involved. Kelly and Steve slowly began to manipulate and convince him. At first, David was terrified, because he had never done anything illegal in his life. But Steve tempted him with dreams of luxury, comfort, and a carefree future. David's frustration, Kelly's emotional support, and Steve's greed together pushed him to a point where turning back became very difficult. The plan they made was simple but foolish. On the night of October 4, 1997, after finishing his duty, David would stay inside the vault, disable the security cameras, steal their tapes, load the cash into a company van, and escape. The idea was that David would take $50,000 and flee to Mexico, because that was the maximum amount he could legally carry across the border. The remaining money would stay with Steve, and after things cooled down, it would be divided equally among them. However, there was a major flaw in this plan. David was taking all the risk but escaping with only $50,000, while the rest of the stolen millions would remain with Steve. Blinded by greed and desperation, David never stopped to think whether Steve would ever truly share the money later. On the evening of October 4, 1997, around 6 p.m., David sent the trainee staff home and remained alone in charge of the vault. Nervous and frightened, he went inside and disabled 2 security cameras, removing their tapes as planned. But he made a critical mistake: he forgot about a third camera hidden in a corner of the wall. That camera continued recording everything. David began loading the vault's cash into the armored van. This time, he wasn't just transporting money, he was emptying the entire vault by himself. Most of the cash was in $20 bills. According to estimates, there were more than 800,000 individual notes, packed into over 8,000 bundles. It took a long time to move all of it. In total, David loaded about $17.3 million into the van, unaware that he had just committed the second-largest cash robbery in American history at the time. Overwhelmed with excitement, he even started dancing inside the vault, and that dance was captured by the hidden third camera. The next morning, when other Loomis Fargo employees arrived and tried to open the vault, they discovered that the keys were missing. The police were called, and it quickly became clear that David was the only person who was not present. He was immediately declared the prime suspect. When investigators reviewed the footage from the hidden camera, all doubts turned into certainty. The video showed David committing the theft and repeatedly using his pager, proving that he was not acting alone. The police and the FBI launched a massive manhunt. After 2 days of searching, they found the armored van abandoned in a wooded area. Inside the van, they discovered more than $3 million in cash, which had likely been left behind because of the sheer weight and lack of time. The stolen security tapes were also inside the van. The remaining amount, around $14 million, was with David's accomplices. Most of the money was in unmarked $20 bills, making it difficult to trace. As planned, David had already fled to Mexico with $50,000 and was staying at a luxury beach resort. The FBI announced a $500,000 reward and asked the public to report anyone who had suddenly become wealthy. The campaign produced countless tips, most of them useless. But one call changed everything. A caller reported that his neighbor had suddenly come into a large amount of money. That neighbor was Steve Chambers. Under surveillance, the FBI discovered that Steve and his wife, Michelle, had purchased a large house, a new BMW, and were spending lavishly. Bank records showed that large sums had been deposited shortly after October 4, mostly in $20 bills. A bank teller also reported that Michelle had asked how much money could be deposited without being reported to federal authorities. The FBI's suspicion turned into certainty. They secretly tapped Steve's phone and soon intercepted a shocking conversation between Steve and another man, Mike McKinney. In the call, they discussed a plan to have David Gant killed in Mexico. Steve wanted David eliminated so he could keep all the stolen money for himself. Mike McKinney was arrested and confessed everything. He revealed that David was in Mexico and explained how, after the robbery, the cash had been transferred from the Loomis Fargo van to another vehicle in the parking lot of the Renault and Renault Printing Company, where Steve himself worked. Because of poor planning, limited time, and the massive amount of cash, they had abandoned about $3 million in the original van and left it in nearby woods, only a few kilometers from Steve's workplace and the Loomis Fargo facility. Within the first 10 days, the FBI had identified the entire group. However, they waited several months to gather solid evidence. Finally, on March 1, 1998, David Gant was arrested in Mexico. The next day, Steve Chambers, his wife Michelle, and Kelly Campbell were arrested in Charlotte, North Carolina. The FBI recovered about 88% of the stolen money. The rest had already been spent by Steve and his wife on their luxurious lifestyle. Steve Chambers was sentenced to 11 years in prison, while David Gant received a 7-year sentence. David was also ordered to repay millions of dollars that had gone missing, even though he himself had never actually spent that money. In 2016, this extraordinary crime inspired the Hollywood movie masterminds. Ironically, David Gant worked as a consultant on the film that told his own story. However, he was not paid for his work, because by law, any money he earned would have gone directly toward repaying the stolen amount.